for almost 30 years, right? We've been Partner of the Year for the several past years. We're part of the Microsoft's Inner Circle, which is top 5% of all Microsoft partners, right? With Ken and his experience, I'll probably go into a little bit more detail once I kind of hand it over to him. But right, Business Central, ERP, and Dynamics 365 CRMs are our bread and butter, where we can come in and help with consultant services and implementation as well. Wherever we're needed, we're there to provide that service. And then, right, those are our bread and butter, but we do help with Microsoft's full stack of tools, everything A to Z, right? We do have teams dedicated to cloud, Azure, PowerPoint, SharePoint, anything with Power Apps. And this is kind of just a quick look, right? There's a lot of things to cover, a lot of teams, and we like to have experts in each individual field and not have one person who's somewhat good at everything. So if any questions, feel free to kind of interject. But Ken, I'll turn the time over to you and let you do your thing.
Okay. This session is simplify the lead to cash process flow by combining elements of CRM and ERP systems. So looks like we've I'll just do a quick introduction of myself as we go through this a little bit, so you get a feel for who I am. So Ken Berry, an enterprise solution architect here at JourneyTEAM. I've been with the company just a few months, but I come from a career of technology consulting. Started out with PwC, and actually then founded a regional tech consulting firm, and built that up over the last 20, 25 years. And then we were acquired by a mid-market technology consulting firm a few years ago, and then I've now joined JourneyTEAM. A lot of experience in ERP and CRM, e-commerce, integration, development, those types of things, pulling together the full kind of enterprise stack of products and services. Spent some time in the advisory services area, and now kind of serving in that enterprise solution architect role, focused on ERP and CRM solutions. And my my specialized background is really that kind of growth enablement, so that emerging growth segment, really helping companies that are maybe starting out relatively small, sometimes mid-size, but getting ready for that type of explosive growth. And that's a little bit about me. I'll just kind of keep going through. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about, and I'm going to take myself off camera for a minute, focus on this. So I want to focus primarily on this puzzle of dealing with CRM and ERP systems. But as we kind of look at this, I'll try to clip through these fairly quickly since there's just a small number of us today. But when I look at, as I go and look in my background, one of the things that I've always liked to do from the time I was relatively young is to actually put together jigsaw puzzles. And CRM and ERP is certainly an example of kind of assembling a particular type of jigsaw puzzle. But if you look back at how a jigsaw puzzle works, and you kind of try to break it down into manageable pieces, these are some of the things that come to mind. So we've got the ability to kind of attack that jigsaw puzzle in bite-sized chunks or phases. Keep an eye on the big picture as you're going through this. Going through putting together a puzzle, for instance, typically if you've put together a puzzle before, hopefully most of you have, you'll take the puzzle pieces out of a box. The box has the picture that you're trying to represent when you get the completed puzzle put together. And so that's, keeping an eye on that big picture. The process I go through when I lay out a puzzle is I take all the pieces out of the box, lay them on a table or a large surface, and start to turn over those pieces one by one. And then, as we move forward, I look at that and I say, okay, what's the easiest way to kind of deal with this massive puzzle? And we look and we say, okay, well, let's take the outline and the border first. Let's put an outline around that puzzle and take all the straight edge pieces and lay them out first and kind of put a border around the puzzle. That gives us, frames it in, gives us an idea of what we're up against. Then we take and look, I take and look for patterns or groupings, things like colors, things like certain patterns as I'm looking back at that big picture puzzle and looking at those patterns or groupings. Then we actually go through and organize. I'll go through and organize those things into light colors, put these light colors in this section, these light colors in that section, or those patterns.
Hey, Ken.
Yeah.
I think we're having trouble seeing your screen. It's not sharing it anymore.
Okay. Let's see here. I wonder what happened. Oh, let me share it again. Okay. Is that better?
There we go. Yes. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. So we're just clipping through these things that related to putting a puzzle together. Was down to look for those patterns and groupings like colors, things that you would organize together as you put that puzzle together. Then sometimes invariably, if it's a large puzzle, you may need to get help just so you can put that puzzle together quicker, faster, and smarter. And so sometimes I'll solicit the help of a friend or a family member and put that puzzle together faster. But ultimately, it just comes down to patience and persistence when putting together a particular puzzle. So in this particular case, I actually looked up recently, just in the last couple of days, I looked up what's the largest jigsaw puzzle that's available for purchase. And there's a company that makes a jigsaw puzzle for Disney called Disney Memories. It's a 40,000 piece puzzle. And learning a little bit about that, they said if the typical person, if they spent 1 hour per day, they could put that 40,000 piece puzzle together in 1 year. So you can see it can be a long drawn out process, something that you may want to get help on as you go through the process. So just want to kind of apply that to what we're talking about here today. So simplify that lead to cash process and just take this puzzle thing all the way through. So these are the topics we're going to cover in this session. Going to work on ultimately keeping an eye on that big picture. We'll talk a little bit about establishing a project vision. We'll lay out the pieces. We'll talk about the lead to cash process components, how things are organized logically from an ERP and CRM function. Then we'll establish some borders around that puzzle. We'll talk about doing what things we could potentially do in an ERP system versus a CRM system, and we'll look at 3 different scenarios of a customer that may fit into more of an ERP centric solution, another one that may fit into more of a CRM centric solution, and a third one that may fit into more of a CRM and full ERP solution. Then we'll talk a little bit. So that most of this, the first 3 bullets there will be somewhat conceptual. And we're going to jump in and talk a little bit more technically about some of the integration pieces, assuming that we are working with a full stack CRM and ERP implementation. The integration becomes very key to that. So we'll talk about some of the patterns and groupings that we need to adhere to make sure we have a nice, easy, somewhat easy and seamless integration. And then talking about, just getting that help for partners like JourneyTEAM to help streamline the timeline and avoid some of the costly mistakes. Just kind of keep going through this. We'll talk about this big picture. That's kind of our first major topic here. We want to work to establish an overall project and vision when we're looking at implementing any kind of CRM or ERP solution or some combination of the two. We really need, as a company and as a consulting group, we need to focus on the business value, not just deploying the latest or coolest technology. At JourneyTEAM, we talk about a flag plant objective. This is an overall business objective for any given CRM, ERP, or other project. And it's really to kind of bring a business flavor and keep everybody's eyes on that big picture. This is just an example of one flag plant objective. It may or may not be perfect, but it's targeted towards bringing business value to the customer. So we talk about streamline the processes by bringing everything to one unified system from the ERP and CRM side of things to support making better business decisions going forward in a cost-effective manner. That's an example of one flag plant objective. So I think it's important to establish a big picture, just like that big puzzle picture on the box. You want to have a vision for where you're going with this project so that when you get there, you know that you've accomplished that particular flag plant objective. Just a couple things to go along with that. We're going to talk about, as part of that big picture, deploying the right combination of the CRM and ERP systems to meet the flag plant objective. We don't want to, and part of the theme of this is, right solution for the right company. We don't want to overcomplicate things. If you only need a little bit of CRM and a lot of ERP or vice versa, then we want to tailor the solution to meet your flag plant objective in the most cost-effective and business-centric objective for that particular business. So, and then we just talk about simplifying and standardizing some of the integration points between CRM and ERP to keep things somewhat simple that way and deliver on that vision, so we don't get caught up in the weeds. When I move forward to that next thing, we're going to talk about some of these layout of the actual pieces. So when we first open up that puzzle box, we dump out all the pieces. Some of them are upside down, some of them are on top of each other. We have to lay those out so we understand what those particular pieces are. These are the high-level pieces in the lead to cash process. So we'll talk a little bit about these for a minute. You can see there, starting from left to right, we've got lead, opportunity, quote, order, fulfillment, invoice, and cash. And then across the top there, we have things related to the actual departments or parts of the business that are most affected by these particular areas. So we've got marketing, moving towards sales, and operations and finance. And so you can kind of see that lead to cash process follows really through the heart of any given business, starting with that marketing lead. The salespeople will typically work with those opportunities. In a traditional sense, they'll be quoting things back to the potential prospect, and that quote will eventually and opportunity will actually eventually be closed won, hopefully, and that quote will become an actual order, which then gets transferred over typically to the back office operations, and they go through their normal procurement and fulfillment process, and eventually accounting gets a hold of things and things get invoiced, and then accounting in that particular case may collect the cash. This particular process can be different for every different type of company. So this is more of a traditional lead to cash flow with a salesperson involved and salesperson kind of running it through the gamut, and then on the back end side, maybe some sort of fulfillment of actual product or service through to the accounting piece. If you kind of overlay the traditional with something maybe a little bit more modern, you might have a company that, and we'll talk through some of these things, but if it's a heavy e-commerce piece, those first parts on the marketing, sales, and all the way through order might happen very rapidly on the e-commerce website or the shopping cart site, and the customer might actually basically convert themselves from lead to opportunity to quote to order all in one fell swoop, and actually even pay the cash associated with it. And then there's typically some sort of fulfillment invoice and maybe just reconciliation of that cash on the back end from the ERP side. And you can kind of see that service businesses may have a slightly different variation of this flow. I'm going to move on to the next slide. Other pieces that we need to turn over in that kind of conceptual process of selecting or looking at the ERP and CRM elements. We need to look at some of these other potential complexity things that come up in the lead to cash process. I touched on the last slide, I touched on multi-channel orders from an e-commerce perspective. You may take traditional call center orders either through a salesperson or through a customer representative. Excuse me. You may also have retail orders that are coming in through multiple channels, sometimes called omni-channel, multi-channel opportunities to collect orders into the lead to cash process. Some other CRM type sales process complexity that can get introduced into the CRM side of the equation are complexity as it relates to configuring pricing and quoting. We sometimes refer to that as CPQ in the CRM world. So if you have sophisticated configure price and quote requirements, those can breed some complexity in the CRM process. And then we have commissions processing, subscription or renewal management. Those things can also need to be looked at as you're turning over these pieces and laying them out. Make sure you know what is in front of you. CRM, other customer service areas, certainly case management and the things that go along with that. There's potentially there's field service pieces and professional service pieces that come into play there on the CRM. Some of those pieces are also sometimes represented in the ERP side of things. But as we kind of move backwards or back office into the ERP areas, there's certainly other areas in the ERP things that we need to turn over and uncover as we look at a solution. Is there complexity with the supply chain, procurement or approvals or landed costs, things coming in from importers or things of that nature? Or their manufacturing complexity related things, order fulfillment, things related to inventory, warehouse management, third-party logistics integration, those types of things. And then other things like payroll, HR, sales tax, credit card payments can breed some complexity as well. Okay, I want to talk about some of the lead to cash borders that we put around things. So we talk about, laying out borders around the puzzle that we're talking about. Some of the challenges we have with the CRM and ERP lead to cash pieces. Our ERP was born with a one-size-fits-all approach. So the audience, when ERP systems first kind of came into play, this concept of an enterprise system was born with a one-size-fits-all approach. But invariably, that audience was too broad. So the ERP systems would try to build out lots of features and functions for sales and operations and finance and HR. But because it was so broad, they couldn't be as deep in each area as they wanted to. So there was specialization spinoffs. That's where the CRM pieces, some of the other supply chain management things spun off. But we're going to talk mostly today about just the best of breed approach as it relates to CRM and ERP. That customer relationship management is that front office sales, kind of driving sales piece for marketing, sales quoting, orders, et cetera. And then that ERP piece is that back office piece of purchasing, planning, manufacturing. And we're going to talk a little bit about that integration between the CRM and ERP and making that and talking about the critical success of making that integration work in a timely and cost-effective manner. And then just a reminder to try to consolidate as much as possible on one system. Okay, I'm going to keep going through. These are the typical lead to cash CRM and ERP functions. On the CRM side, We typically are dealing with flexible, sometimes customizable processes surrounding some of the things we talked about earlier, but that lead to opportunity, that pipeline management, the CPQ functions, the order entry flexibility. So sometimes that CRM system is where we would do things that are highly focused on that ordering process, things that are related to the customer, sometimes customer portals, things like that, things that require heavy configuration and customization. Those things tend to move towards the front end CRM system. And then sometimes we'll dip into some of the case management, field service, professional services, subscriptions, and renewals. We also have on the back end side, it's a little bit more structured and repeatable processes surrounding order management, assembly and production, manufacturing, projects and jobs, inventory and fulfillment, planning, purchasing, payables, financial accounting, and extensions like HR and payroll. Okay, this is when we really talk about pulling together CRM and ERP. This is typically how we would pull those together if we were kind of split the baby down the middle a little bit. You can see the CRM pieces on the left and the ERP pieces on the right. So you've got that lead opportunity quote order, and then as we get more onto the right, more on the fulfillment, invoice, cash, and finance side. Hopefully this is not too elementary, but we'll go into some examples of these and get to these next screens. So I wanted to talk about some just scenario examples. So in this particular case, this first scenario is we're going to talk about a mostly ERP type of bordered solution. So in this particular case, this is a typical company size that might fit into a mostly ERP solution. Typical company size would be a small to mid-sized company, maybe a specialized company, let's see. Okay, excuse me, I was just taking a look here. You might have this smaller company might have some light CRM needs, limited salesperson interaction with the system. So they don't have heavy CRM needs because the salespeople aren't typically interacting with the system. Might be primarily in e-commerce or traditional sales quoting through something like an Excel or email kinds of things, maybe something that they wouldn't necessarily need inside the system, or something that they could do maybe inside the ERP system, and a little need to integrate with other systems. Possible solution in this particular case might be ERP system like Business Central from Microsoft, which does include some light CRM capabilities. So if there is some lead prospect kind of pipeline management, quoting, that type of thing can be handled by the Business Central application. In this particular case, probably no separate CRM system, or if there was one, it may not need to be integrated. And then light import export with other applications. An example of a company in this particular case is a company that I've worked with previously. Excuse me. Get a drink of water there. This would be a company, a e-commerce supplements company. So a company that sells almost all of their products on the internet through an e-commerce site. May not, and they do not have a salesperson or salespeople typically involved in the sales process, but they have a heavy inventory and warehouse management needs on the back end. Worked with a company that was, in this very particular case, fairly high volume e-commerce supplements coming in. So they had definitely some high volume e-commerce needs that they were managing and customizing, but at the tail end but on the CRM side of things, not a need for a traditional CRM system, but they did have the back office accounting needs. And so their particular solution was Business Central with an extension for warehouse management, and they had e-commerce integration with no CRM system required. I'm going to skip over this one. This is actually a second one that might fit into that mostly ERP. solution, but I won't go into details on this particular one, other than to say this particular one started out with an interesting thing about this wholesale importer was they started out with a CRM and ERP solution, and they found that they really, because of the static needs of their sales order process and fairly low volume, that they really didn't need a full-scale CRM system to manage that part of the process. So they were actually moving everything over to Business Central, the light CRM needs that they had, and combining that with all the ERP pieces. The advantage of moving to a single system is that you don't have to deal with the integration points. All of your users are in one system. You've got, minimizes some of your licensing concerns and things of that nature. I'm going to move on, keep clipping through some of these things. I've got some other areas to cover as far as integration at the end. In this particular case, want to talk just about a scenario with a lead to cash customer or customers that would apply when that a mostly CRM type solution would apply. So let's talk about, looks like I maybe lost my share again. Okay. In this particular case, this is a mostly CRM type of solution. The typical company size might be a mid-size emerging growth company, heavy salesperson interaction with the opportunity quote process, may have some unique out-of-the-box CPQ considerations, and may have some e-commerce. The possible solution for this type of company would be Microsoft Dynamics CRM, CE, and some light out-of-the-box integration with an accounting system like Business Central or even QuickBooks in any particular case. So as we talk about this particular company, is a company that we've been working with as a nonprofit organization. They're primarily a services organization, so they don't actually fill actual products on the back end. A lot of their needs are related to the customer type relationships, their partners, their volunteers, their donors, their clients, and their coaches. Their business is in the service of these coaches helping underserved clients, and they need to be able to track all of this interaction between these different entities. They need to be able to track that through something like case management and things like that. They don't have any back office manufacturing inventory, no planning or purchasing, and in their particular case, they are deploying Dynamics CRM with excuse me, some heavy customizations, and they're going to tie that back to a light ERP like Business Central for financials. Third scenario is a company or companies that might fall into this kind of split CRM and ERP down the middle. These are companies that have heavy needs on both sides of the CRM and ERP equation. They may be medium to large size companies that have sizable needs and a budget to go along with that, because these solutions tend to be a little more pricey when you're deploying both CRM and ERP solutions. Typically two different implementations at some level and combining those into one overall program to work together. So this particular case, heavy salesperson interaction, maybe some configure price quote complexity, heavy customer service, possible multi-channel, complex back office processes like manufacturing, warehouse, fulfillment, etc. So this would be a full CRM implementation between the full suite of CRM and ERP systems. An example of this is a company we're working with at JourneyTEAM is a mid-sized wholesaler of helmets and accessories. They are working with B2B and B2C e-commerce sites as well. They have sales and ops people that interact with the customer and enter the orders. They have some unique pricing and bundling and order entry considerations. They have heavy inventory and warehouse management needs, procurement, planning, purchasing, and payables needs on the back end. and then the straightforward financial needs. Their solution is Dynamic CRM and with some customizations, and Business Central ERP on the back end with e-commerce and warehouse management integration. I'm going to skip over this one. This is a software company that also is looking at full stack CRM and ERP implementation. So let's talk about some of the CRM integration points about, keeping things simple. So as we talked about that puzzle, sometimes you get those borders, what's the CRM system, what's going to be in the ERP system. Now we're going to talk about filling in the blanks. Sometimes filling in those blanks can be a little bit of a challenge, especially as we talk about the integration points between CRM and ERP. So in that scenario where we're kind of really splitting the processing between CRM and ERP, we'll let the CRM do the pieces it does well with the pipeline management and case management and things like that. And then on the back end side, we are going to do things with the ERP system. So as we talk about, these are the things we want to cover in this particular section. I'm going to talk about establishing a system of record for each major data entity. We're going to talk about trying to utilize one-way integration whenever possible. We're going to talk about viewing or using Canvas apps for data entities that may typically try to replicate data into, rather than try to replicate data into both systems, we might try to just create a view into one system from the other. Then just the proper tool, integration tool selections. We're going to talk about each of these somewhat separately. So these are when we talk about the actual data entities between a CRM and an ERP system in this lead to cash process, these are some of the actual data elements, and these are the most typical data elements that we talk about between sharing information between the CRM and the ERP system. So we try to initially establish, what is the kind of the primary source or the system of record. The area we would go to is kind of the main system for this particular information. So, and we'll drill into this even further on future slides. But in this particular case, we've got the items and products typically referred to as items in the ERP system, products in the CRM system. We typically establish the ERP system as the system of record for items. As I go down that ERP side, I'll do that first. The inventory on hand is typically the system of record as the ERP side, as well as orders, invoices, and payments. We look at the CRM side of things. We typically push people towards, or companies towards, pricing. The complex pricing pieces are better suited for CRM. Certainly leads and opportunities, accounts, contacts, and quotes are typically initialized and system of record approach from the CRM perspective. We'll talk a little bit more about those as we go forward. So when we talk about CRM to ERP integration, we want to, as much as possible, keep things simple as possible between the two systems. So as we've talked about with some of the other solutions about mostly an ERP or mostly a CRM solution, in some cases we're doing that to eliminate certain licensing and complexity costs, but also to eliminate or minimize the level of integration. So these are just some different data points on integration. So if we can eliminate some of the integration in a low volume or static environment, we can deal with certain parts of integration between these entities that we talked about earlier. We might, for instance, if you're only dealing with a handful of items or products and they rarely change on a monthly or even yearly basis, you might be able to just add a new item periodically into both systems and not have to deal with any kind of integration between the two systems. That's obviously a low-cost implementation, but maybe suits a particular company's needs. It doesn't have high volume items and products changes. And then we can also, with a no integration type solution, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but creating that cross-platform view of data from one system to the other so that you'd actually don't have to move the data, you're just referencing the data in the other system. We talk a little bit about one-way integration. When possible, we want to move information in a one-way fashion. It's relatively straightforward from the development side of things, and it can simplify things greatly. We can talk about some levels of split integration where you may actually take a particular, think of like maybe a customer where you may actually have information in two different systems. Might start in one, flow to the ERP system, but there might be certain field level things that you only maintain in the ERP side of that customer equation. So that's what I call split integration. There are some times when that may make sense. And then a two-way sync is obviously full-on integration. I think as a consumer, we get used to that. Certainly, even as office workers, we'll sit down and punch out something on our email, and we expect that email to show up on our phone so we can see what was sent and received, and it's a complete two-way syncing of integration. And that can be ultimately provides a lot of value and benefit, but can be very costly and sometimes doesn't always make sense. So we'll talk about these a little bit. Let me go to this next slide. So we talk about specific parts of the CRM and ERP integration pieces, and I got to clip through this pretty quickly. So the pieces along the left over here are things that I've already talked about on that previous slide. But as you look at the CRM and ERP systems, these are as a graphical view of what I was talking about. So items, these that are in bold print are really kind of the system of record, sometimes the originating system for these items. So this, in a particular case, items would typically originate in the ERP system and then flow over to products in the CRM system. Pricing and may originate and be referenced mostly and maintained in the CRM side of the equation, and may or may not need to come over to pricing. Thus, the dashed line here, or the dotted line, just means it may or may not be necessary. Inventory on hand is maintained in the ERP system typically. It may need to be pushed to CRM if there's quoting and ordering considerations that need to take on-hand quantities into account. Leads and opportunities are only on the CRM system side of things typically in an integrated environment, unless this was all done inside an ERP system, then this leads and opportunities could be part of that ERP system in a light CRM type of a situation. Counts and contacts are typically originated on the CRM system, pushed over to the ERP system. As I mentioned, these are candidates for possibly some split integration or eventually some two-way integration depending on the needs there. Quotes are typically started in the CRM system, become orders on the CRM side, or quickly, once they're moved to order status, they make their way over to the ERP system, which then becomes typically the system of record as that order is acted on in the fulfillment process. And once that order is invoiced, the invoices sit in the ERP side of things, and payments come in against those invoices. Here again, some companies like to have that 360 view of invoices and payments back over to the CRM system so that the salespeople and others on that side can actually look at things. These are sometimes you can avoid doing that by doing some type of Canvas app, which we'll talk about here in a second as well, and eliminate this need for these particular integration points. Okay, I clip through, talk a little bit about these Canvas apps here. That was what I was just referring. So Canvas app is or a view. You could create a canvas app or view of information from one system and displaying it in another system. So in this particular case, this on the left here is representative. This whole thing is a screen that is available in a particular CRM implementation. And in this particular case, used a Power App to actually pull in the invoice information from the back office ERP system, and we're showing that on the CRM side of things. So the invoice information doesn't actually exist in the CRM database, exists only in the ERP database, but we've been able to build an application where we can reference that. That eliminates the need of having to bring in that type of invoice information into the CRM world, and that can actually simplify the integration process and database elements. Another example of this, let's see if I can go back up here. I missed one screen there. This is an example of a Power BI. So using Microsoft Power BI, which JourneyTEAM has some expertise and a team that can help with this type of organization, but building, in this particular case, a dashboard that can be pulling information from multiple sources. So this particular dashboard is just being displayed in a back office Business Central ERP system. And in this particular case, we could be showing information from the CRM, like this salesperson's daily sales by salesperson could actually be coming from the CRM system if that was appropriate, or it could be coming from the back office things. So this could be a combination of information from both or even external systems. This could be inside this could be embedded in the CRM side or in the back office ERP Business Central side in this particular case. Let's see, sorry, I'm going to go back over here. And, lastly, on the ERP integration side, you need to choose the right tool for the right job. Microsoft has lots of tools all the way from Excel to Power Automate to Dataverse, which has some built-in synchronization between CRM and ERP. Azure Logic Apps, which JourneyTEAM has developed a tool set for to help in the integration process. Other things like APIs, we talked about Canvas apps, and some third-party purpose-built integration tools like Typico, Scribe, Kingsway Soft, Boomi. These things are all choosing the right tool for the job will greatly simplify the synchronization or the integration of information between the CRM and ERP systems. We're just about out of time, so I just want to kind of summarize here. Microsoft and JourneyTEAM can be a great partner in this CRM ERP journey. Certainly, one vendor solution, Microsoft comes closer to that in the CRM ERP world than any other vendor out there. They have the Microsoft Dynamics CEPs, the ERP with Business Central and Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations or Finance and Supply Chain. They have BI, Cloud, Office, and SharePoint components, and certainly a host of integration tools and other building blocks. As a partner, JourneyTEAM can help you with providing that big picture advice and guidance on solution architecture. We have a very talented and deep CRM team, as well as a broad and deep ERP team, so we can pull those pieces together, working with our BI, Cloud, Office, and SharePoint teams to tie it seamlessly back into your particular environment. And then we have a development team that can kind of help pull all these pieces together.